Hello, I want to share with you a solution that I've come up with for a big problem in astrology. The big problem is that the ascendant disappears. At certain locations, it's gone. And this is a problem for astrology because the ascendant is critically important. It's critically important in Vedic astrology, in ancient Western, and modern Western. It's considered by many astrologers to be the most important point in the chart. And what do you do if it blows up on you, which it can do? So the first thing I want to do is show you a demonstration of this problem of the ascendant blowing up on us, we can call it. It disappears. And then I'm going to show you my solution to the problem. I've been thinking about this problem on and off for decades, and I've finally come up with a solution that I like. I've heard other solutions to the problem. They're okay, but I really like this solution. So let me show you the problem. Okay, I'm in the Sirius 3.0 software. I'm going to go into the Astro Clock feature. So I'll click on this icon here, and I'll click on Astro Clock. And I have set up the Astro Clock for Rovaniemi Airport, which is an airport in Finland. It's just north of the town of Rovaniemi. Rovaniemi, if I remember right, has 63,000 people. The airport has about 500,000 passengers per year, so it's a real airport. People are moving in and out of there. And there are certain times of the day in Rovaniemi Airport where there's no ascendant. So what would you do if the plane took off at that time? It would be some kind of alternate reality or something. There's no ascendant. If a baby is born, well, life is actually quite normal when the ascendant disappears. And that's the big problem for astrology. How do we explain this? That there isn't some kind of hiccup in time. There isn't some kind of, like we go into some kind of Bermuda Triangle weird energy system. Twice a day this happens. When the ascendant disappears, everything seems quite normal. So we can come up with different solutions to this. I've come up with a solution to it that I want to share with you. But first, let me show you the problem. I have a chart wheel here where I've removed all of the planets. I've just left the ascendant, the midheaven, and something called the vertex, which I'll talk a little bit more about. You're familiar with the ascendant, we all know that, and the midheaven, and I've got the vertex. I've removed everything else. I'm going to start the animation, and I can speed it up. There's this slider thing. If I slide it to the right, it's like the gas pedal of a car. It goes faster and faster and faster. So this is the movement of the ascendant and the midheaven at Rovaniemi Airport on June 1st, 2019. And I've speeded it up. You can see the time here flying by. In a few seconds, an hour goes by. So it's a speeding up so we can see the movement. And notice a strange thing happens, that the midheaven is going faster than the ascendant. Here, I've got my cursor on the midheaven. You see this MC, and watch it. It's down in Gemini, Cancer, going into Leo, and notice that it's catching up to the ascendant. It's catching up to the ascendant. I'm going to stop this. Just when it gets close, stop. So what's happening here is that I've happened to stop this Astro Clock on June 3rd, 2019 at about 1:38 in the morning. And the midheaven is conjunct the ascendant. And now I can step minute by minute or second by second or hour by hour. I'm going to move 1 second at a time. I'm clicking this right arrow because I want to slow it way, way down. And I'm moving 1 minute at a time. So now it's 2:01, 2:02, 2:03, and you'll see that the ascendant, midheaven, and the vertex are moving very nicely, very slowly. And as I keep doing this, Now something interesting is going to happen. The ascendant is at 1 degree Capricorn. The midheaven is at 29 Sag. They are conjunct with a 2 degree orb. So one thing that's interesting is that the ascendant and midheaven are conjunct. That's already a little bit strange. That means the 10th, 11th, and 12th houses, if you use what we call a quadrant house system, are all stuck between 2 degrees. This is something that encourages people to use whole sign houses or equal houses. If you're using a house system like Placidus, those 3 houses are all occupying only 2 degrees, and the opposite house is occupying only 2 degrees. But what I really want to show you is what happens next. I'm going to go a minute later. Oh, it already jumped. Let me go by seconds. I'm going to go 1 second at a time. So just to review what's going on here. It's June 3rd, 2019 at 2:31 in the morning at Rovaniemi Airport. And like I said, there are people there, and there are planes coming in and out, and I'm going to move the chart 1 second. Everything looks pretty good so far. I'm up to 2 hours, 31 minutes, and 26 seconds in the morning, and I'm going forward, and the ascendant and midheaven are moving very, very slowly, and now something strange begins to happen. The ascendant is at 8 degrees Capricorn. I'm going to move 1 second of time. Just 1 second of time. From, what time is it? 2:31:56. 2 hours, 31 minutes, 56 seconds in the morning on June 3rd. I go 1 second of time, and the ascendant moves almost 1 degree. And now it's moving 2 degrees in a second of time. I'm going to go 1 second forward. The ascendant's at 11 Capricorn. It's 12, 14, 17. It's now moving 3 degrees a second of time, 5 degrees a second of time. I'm now going to go 1 second forward. There's the ascendant at 22 Capricorn. It's moving 7 degrees in 1 second. It gets worse. Okay. The ascendant's at 29 Capricorn. I go forward 1 second. 11 Aquarius. It just moved 12 degrees. From 11 Aquarius, it goes to 4 Pisces. From 4 Pisces, 9 Aries. The ascendant just moved 35 degrees in 1 second of time. So it's difficult to time events to the second. I mean, the ascendant basically doesn't exist. You would have to time something to like 100th of a second or 1,000th of a second or something to know what the ascendant is. It's not realistic. So the ascendant is moving so fast, we really don't even know where it is. This is the best we can measure to the accuracy that we have. So what's happening is the ascendant is basically blown up. And the reason it's blown up is because the ecliptic plane, which is the path of the sun, is now identical to the horizon plane, and there is no ascendant, because the ascendant is where the ecliptic plane intersects the horizon plane. Bottom line is, there are places and times where there is no ascendant. So how would you do a chart? If the airplane flight began, or a baby was born at this instant, or there was a horary question, it'll happen twice a day that the ascendant blows up, it's gone, it disappears. Okay, this is a problem. It's a flaw in the astrological model. It's something we have to figure out an explanation to. Okay, so let's go back to our tutorial video, and now I'm going to show you how I've solved this problem of the ascendant disappearing. Okay, let me go ahead. I'm just going to exit this Astro Clock and come up with a solution. Okay, this slide just repeats what I've just told you, that there is an airport, that is on the Arctic Circle, and twice a day the ascendant disappears. But events at these times are normal. Here's an interesting point in this last paragraph. Astrology developed, around Egypt, what is current day Iran, Greece, these areas which are in the latitude of the 20s up into the 30s. If astrology had developed up in Scandinavia or these very northern parts where the ascendant just disappears, I wonder if they would have been able to put so much emphasis on the ascendant. I don't think so, because you would have times when the ascendant disappears. But astrology developed where the ascendant behaves normally, so that wasn't a problem for them in those locations. Okay, to understand how I solve this problem, I have to introduce you to a few concepts. The first one is the celestial horizon. So here's a picture of a sphere and a flat surface. In geometry, a flat surface is called a plane. A flat surface. So we can think of this sphere as the Earth, and we can think of this point on the sphere where this red arrow is coming out as where a person is located. And over here there's another person located on this part of the Earth over here. And this flat surface is balanced on the Earth, is a way to think of it. I'm explaining this in non-mathematical, intuitive ways. You can think of this flat surface as the floor. If you're in a building, the floor of the building that you're on would be this flat surface if it was perfectly balanced on the Earth. And that is the celestial horizon. You extend your floor out all the way out into the sky. That's the celestial horizon. What does the celestial horizon have to do with the ascendant? The ascendant point is where the path of the sun, known as the ecliptic plane, where it crosses the horizon, this celestial horizon, that is the ascendant. So our astrology is built on a kind of pure geometry of these perfect surfaces balanced on the Earth, extended out into the sky. Another little detail is sometimes people explain it as I have just explained it, that this is the horizon plane on the surface of the Earth. You'll also read explanations where it's described as in the center of the Earth, not on the surface. Actually, it makes no difference, because the diameter of the Earth is so small compared to extending it out all the way into the stars that this relatively small width from the surface of the Earth to the center of the Earth is negligible. I just want to mention that because technically some people will say that no, this is not the celestial horizon. The celestial horizon goes through the center of the Earth. Well, for all intents and purposes, they're identical anyway. Okay, so that's the celestial horizon. One or two more things, and I'm ready to show you how I've solved this problem. Here's a person in the middle standing on the celestial horizon. Like, imagine that they're standing on the floor of a building. Now, the celestial horizon is a very big deal in astrology. As I mentioned, it defines where the ascendant is, where the path of the sun happens to intersect, where it, in other words, crosses the horizon plane. That's the ascendant. And this is called a great circle, a big circle with you in the middle of it. Another very important great circle is the Meridian Plane. The Meridian Plane goes over the point directly over your head. That's known as the zenith. And it goes exactly north and then exactly south. An interesting thing about the Meridian Plane is that when planets rise in the east, they'll reach their highest point on the Meridian Plane and then they set. So the Meridian Plane is very important. And where the ecliptic plane crosses the Meridian Plane, that's your midheaven. That's the MC. So if you have the ascendant and MC are where the ecliptic plane intersects these powerful great circles. Now, I'm ready to introduce to you some of the basic ideas on how I've come up with a solution for the ascendant blowing up. I'm going to suggest that we need to look at a third great circle, and I'm not the first person to suggest this. It's the prime vertical. And the prime vertical is exactly like the meridian plane, goes right through the zenith, but it's square to the meridian plane. Instead of going north-south, it goes east-west. Now here's the intuition that I have about why the prime vertical is important. We have 3 dimensions of space: height, width, and depth. In astrology, we have a great circle to define 2 of those 3 dimensions. You can think of it as a building. If you're in a building right now, the floor, as I said, is basically, it is the horizon plane. If it's perfectly balanced on the earth, that's the horizon plane. If you have a house where the walls happen to go perfectly north-south, 2 of the walls are going north-south, then the other 2 walls that are 90 degrees to that are going east-west, of course. Those 2 walls that go north-south, they are the meridian plane, because the distance between those 2 walls is negligible when you extend it out to the stars, so it doesn't matter that they're actually slightly separated. Those 2 walls are the meridian plane. Now, you wouldn't have a room, you would not have a house, if you only had a floor and the walls going north-south. So to make the house whole, to make it functional, and for it to cover all 3 dimensions of space, we need the east-west walls. So we need the ceiling and the floor, that's the horizon. We need the 2 north-south walls, and of course we need the 2 east-west walls. Now we have a box, and we can live in that box. Okay, we can call it our home. So space obviously requires these 3 dimensions, and what's interesting about astrology is that it's based on this pure geometry. If you look outside, you don't see a perfect celestial horizon. You don't see the meridian plane. So astrology is based on these structures in space, these elegant, pure, mathematical shapes. That's what it is, whether we like that or not. That's what our astrology is based on. So it seems logical, it seems intuitive, reasonable, maybe it's right, maybe it's not right, that the prime vertical, that's this great circle that goes east-west, that perhaps it's equally important to the horizon and the meridian plane. And then it gives us this beautiful, balanced geometry of space where we have 2 of the great circles. Now, let's add the 3rd one, and let us guess that this 3rd one, the prime vertical, is just as important as the other 2. That is one of the key ideas to solve this problem, is that life is normal. At Rovaniemi Airport, planes taking off when there's no ascendant, babies being born when there's no ascendant, and they are not in some kind of nirvana space or out of time or some strange reality. They're functioning perfectly normally. How is that possible? Okay, I'm going to show you an idea, a proposed solution. So as I said, we have the 3 planes that define the 3 directions in space. You can think of these as anchors of the physical world. Currently, we rely primarily on just 2 of them. The 3rd one is needed. And to summarize, what we have is the MC is the intersection of the ecliptic plane and the meridian plane. And the MC works everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live. You can live on the equator. You can live on the Arctic Circle. No matter where you live, the MC works. When I did that astro clock, the MC was moving at a normal speed. it behaves nicely, and it behaves nicely everywhere. The ascendant is the second of the three important points, and as I mentioned, it's the intersection of the ecliptic plane and the horizon plane. Each one of these powerful points is the intersection of the ecliptic plane with one of the three great circles. So you'll see in italics, MC, intersection of the ecliptic plane with the meridian plane, the ascendant, the intersection of the ecliptic plane with the horizon plane, and the vertex. This is the third critically powerful point, is the intersection of the ecliptic plane and the prime vertical. This gives us a nice, elegant, beautiful geometry of space, and I'm going to show you how it can solve our problem of the ascendant disappearing. Now, here's the next idea that took me decades to think of, even though it's very simple. Once you come across these things, you go, oh, why did it take me so long? Here's the idea. And this is a bit of a, radical new idea, but if it's right, it's giving us a model that makes sense of the data. The data is life does not go crazy when the ascendant disappears. So here's an idea that at least will fit what we observe, which is that life is normal even when the ascendant disappears, is this. The ascendant is strongest at the equator. So the ascendant becomes weaker. The power of the ascendant weakens as you move away from the equator. Very simple idea, but it's sort of radical. And specifically, when you reach 64 degrees north, which people, as I just said, the 64 degrees north is before the Arctic Circle, so Rovaniemi, Finland, is above 64 north, and this is going to sound a little strange, but we've done stranger things in astrology. The ascendant has disappeared. The power of the ascendant is focused around the equator, and it weakens in strength. And as the ascendant weakens in strength, as you head up very far north or head south, very far south, the power of the vertex increases. So the vertex and the ascendant are two balancing forces. As one increases, the other decreases. It's like a yin-yang sort of balancing act. Astrology was developed not too far from the equator where the ascendant is strong, but as you move way up there, you head up into Rovaniemi, Finland, or anywhere else extremely north, the ascendant gets weaker and weaker and weaker till it disappears. It doesn't exist. It has no strength, and the vertex becomes very, very strong. Now the vertex decreases in strength as you get close to the equator, and it disappears at 26 degrees from the equator. Now, here's a table that shows the strengths, and this may sound a little bit far-fetched, but let me show you the astro clock again. When you see the astro clock for the equator, you're going to see that the vertex acts strange, just as the ascendant acts strange when you get to the Arctic Circle. And it acts so strange it's hard to believe that it would even exist. Well, it does not exist. So this is a radically new idea that the vertex becomes increasingly strong as you head into these extreme latitudes, and it takes over the power of the ascendant. Now, many times the vertex is in the same sign as the ascendant, so if you were born up in a very high latitude, in the 50s or 60s latitude, your ascendant may change according to this theory, or it may not, because the vertex and the opposite point, the anti-vertex, may be in the same signs as the ascendant and descendant, or they may not be, which would mean your rising sign is going to change. Yeah, I know, it's radical. This is maybe hard to believe if you, especially if you live up in one of these very extreme northern latitudes or extreme southern latitudes, that a lot of your rising signs may be changing. Yes, we have to be willing to change, to grow, to develop and adapt our ideas to our observations, because people life doesn't go crazy when the ascendant goes crazy. And we've got to figure out a way to resolve that. And this ends up being geometrically a kind of elegant and beautiful way to resolve it. And here's a table of the strengths that I've come up with that makes sense, and it makes sense in that as you hit 64 latitude, this could be 64 north or south. As you look at this third line from the bottom, the ascendant has disappeared. It's lost strength, and intuitively it makes sense, because what's happening is the ecliptic plane is getting, as you head further north, it's getting closer and closer and closer to being the same as the horizon plane at certain parts of the day, and it's lost its relationship. The horizon plane has lost its relationship to the ecliptic plane because they've moved in close to each other. You need some kind of angular distance for them to impact each other. So as they get closer and closer and closer, they're becoming one, and they're losing their interaction. And at 64 degrees north latitude and south latitude, the ascendant has disappeared in strength. Halfway from the equator to the North Pole, at 45 north latitude or 45 south latitude, the ascendant and vertex have equal strength. So from about 30, I'm just going to say north, but this applies to south as well. At 30 degrees north, the ascendant is dominating, vertex is extremely weak. It's only when you get above 30 degrees north that the vertex really starts kicking in and taking over some of the power of the ascendant, so to speak. And then when you get above 50 north, that's when the ascendant really starts to weaken. Up above 55, heading towards 60 north, it's really weakening, and the vertex is taking over. Now, I showed you, let me show you again actually. Let me start up this Astro clock again and speed it up as I did before, because I want to show you that the vertex behaves very nicely. At Rovaniemi Airport, the vertex remains about 90 degrees before the midheaven. It's only the relationship to the ascendant that gets strange. Let me speed it up a little bit more. So here's the midheaven conjunct the ascendant jumps. Notice the vertex remains about 90 degrees before the midheaven, so the vertex and the midheaven are very well defined and moving along very nicely. It's only the relationship of the vertex and midheaven to the ascendant. It's the ascendant that's behaving strangely and disappearing, becoming conjunct the midheaven, and then it becomes incredibly fast. So the vertex behaves very nicely at the Arctic Circle. Now, let's see what happens at the equator. I'm going to change the place for the Astro clock to be right on the equator, and let's see what happens now with our ascendant, midheaven, and vertex when I go into the Astro clock. And now the place for the Astro clock is right on the equator. Of course, people live right on the equator, or it could be very, very close to the equator. It doesn't have to be exactly on it. You're going to get similar behavior. And let's start up the animation and speed it up. Let me go a little bit faster, and you'll see that the ascendant and midheaven behave very nicely. There's the ascendant 90 degrees ahead of the midheaven. In fact, they're behaving very beautifully with less variation than when you get farther and farther from the equator. The ascendant and midheaven at the equator remain about 90 degrees apart. But notice what happens to the vertex. It jumps from 0 Aries, and then 12 hours later it goes to 0 Libra. This would mean that if the vertex is a valid point for people born near the equator, there are only 2 possible positions for the vertex. So if you are an astrologer in Ecuador, fairly small country right on the equator, and you're doing charts of people born in Ecuador, everybody has their vertex at very, very close to 0 Aries or very, very close to 0 Libra. And if the vertex is an extremely important point, you have only 2 kinds of people. It would be a very boring social life. Everybody's 0 Aries or 0 Libra. But fortunately, socially, life does not become boring at the equator because the vertex becomes weaker and weaker. In fact, it disappears 26 degrees from the equator, nowhere even close to the equator. It's already disappeared in strength. So, let me stop this so you don't go crazy watching these things running around. But you've got the idea. The vertex is bouncing back and forth between 0 Aries and 0 Libra for people born on the equator. So, what we've learned some things here. We've learned that the vertex does not behave nicely near the equator. It's jumping from 0 Aries to 0 Libra, and that's it. We've learned the ascendant does not behave nicely near the Arctic Circle or the Antarctic Circle. It'll behave the same way. It'll go so fast because it's essentially non-existent that within 1 second of time it'll move more than a zodiac sign to the best of our ability to measure these things. The ascendant has become meaningless at these latitudes. So we have our table. This table becomes our new way to think about houses, that if someone is born at about 45 north, there are 2 house systems in effect. Equal from the ascendant. I think it's reasonable to use equal houses with this idea. Equal from the ascendant and equal from the vertex. In some cases, they'll be the same. Now, the vertex, it was developed historically as being on the 7th house cusp. So what I'm going to do here is let's change the chart wheel. I'm going to right click to a different chart wheel. It doesn't matter. Say, let's just use this. Well, no, those glyphs are very small. All right, this is fine with the birth data in the center. Let's take this chart wheel and customize it and put the vertex in the wheel. So I'm right clicking. I go to customize, click vertex, and the vertex is way down here. And let's change the house system to, say, Placidus, something that we often use. Okay, now I've got Placidus houses and 28 degrees Libra rising, and the vertex is 21 Gemini. The midheaven is 0 Leo. Right, I've got the Placidus houses, tropical Placidus. So 0 Leo at the midheaven, 28 Libra rising, and the vertex at 21 Gemini. The vertex, by definition, is always on the 7th house side. So for this chart, it's an arbitrary date and time. Happens to be for 2 days ago when I started developing this tutorial for May 29th, 2019 at 5:09 p.m. approximately. If, say, a baby was born or we did a horary chart, the ascendant is Libra. The anti-vertex is the point opposite the vertex is Sagittarius. In fact, this is interesting. This chart has Jupiter opposition the vertex. And so the vertex is actually the 7th house cusp. Now, one more important point. I'm going to go to Settings, House System, and there's a house system called Vertex on the 7th house. And there it is. And it's put the vertex on the 7th house cusp. And what I'm suggesting is that this is an important house system, especially the further from the equator. Now, this chart is done for Gainesville, Florida. which is about 30 north. At 30 north, the vertex is very weak, so we actually don't want to look at this house system very much. But let's relocate it. Let's go over here to relocate this to any northern place, say Oslo, Norway, any very northern latitude. I'll click OK, and let me change this again to the house system of vertex on the 7th house. Okay, so we've got vertex on the 7th house. Let me customize this, put vertex in the wheel. Okay, sorry about that. But there we go. What I wanted to show you is a chart for Oslo, Norway, because I just created a new chart and it went to my default wheel style. So anyway, I customized the wheel style. Now Oslo, Norway is at almost 60 north, 59 north, 55. At 60 north, the ascendant has gotten extremely weak, and this chart has 12 Aquarius 58 as the anti-vertex. So with charts that have extreme latitudes, as you get into the 50s and 60s latitude, like Oslo at 60 north, it's this chart that is probably the chart we really want to look at. With 12 degrees Aquarius, almost 13 degrees Aquarius, we can call it rising, because actually rising wouldn't be technically the correct term. So we have to think of terminology. We'll just say the anti-vertex. Maybe we'll come up with a new terminology. How about ascending? That might be good. So we can say that for this chart, 12 degrees Aquarius is ascending. That would make sense because the vertex ascends north-south. So it's the ascending point that we want to pay more attention to for somebody born in Oslo, or a horary or an event in Oslo, Norway. So you can go, I'm in the Sirius software, so whatever software you have, I'll just go to Settings, House System, and I can go back to Equal. And now I have the Sagittarius rising. So I can switch between these houses. So Sagittarius is rising, and the vertex on the 7th has Aquarius rising. So again, because this is new, it's very simple, but I just want to repeat, the idea is that as you get to these up to the Arctic Circle or Antarctic Circle, once you start hitting latitudes in the 50s, the vertex is becoming stronger than the ascendant, and they're like a yin-yang balance. As you head to the equator, the ascendant becomes stronger. As you head to the extreme latitudes, the vertex becomes stronger. Now, how do we interpret the vertex is the next question. Well, it's very similar to the ascendant. Very, very similar. Here's the interpretation. The midheaven is reflexive objective awareness, or the opposite quality of the IC. It's an axis, MCIC, of being reflective, aware of your position in the world, your stature in the world, and your home, your inner comfort zone, just not thinking about yourself, pre-reflexive consciousness. The ascendant, descendant is how you express yourself to others, and the response you expect from them. So it's your expression, how you meet the world, and how you expect the world to respond to you. It has a lot to do with friendship. It also has a connection, as compared to the vertex, with our heritage, our ancestors, our gurus who point the way. Because the horizon always intersects the midheaven due north and south. It's a horizontal reality. So as you get closer to the equator, there's more emphasis on your connection to others as friends, your heritage, your ancestry, your lineage, and your wise ancient teachings. As you head farther and farther from the equator and head towards the poles, the vertex, which intersects the meridian plane above and below you at the zenith, and the IC, so it's a movement towards the top and bottom rather than being horizontal, has more to do with collaboration, teamwork, associates, and colleagues. What you do to be a citizen and what you expect from others. So the vertex has more to do with having relationships and how they're useful for making progress or achieving things, and you get a more extreme polarity of being at home or being in the world. The ascendant tends to be, as you head towards the equator, more of friendship on an equal level. It has more of a Libran feeling of everybody relating and appreciating each other. So there's a slight difference in tone, and it makes sense in terms of climate. If you're near the equator, there's less need to be protecting yourself through the cold, bitter winter, getting through it, and you don't have this need for a big, strong home to retreat into. So you're getting more of this, you might say, midheaven emphasis in the extreme latitudes, because the prime vertical goes to the zenith and the IC. Well, this is still a little bit speculative, but it does imply that there's some slight difference in how things function as you move away from the equator. And of course, just based on climate, there are some big differences that we deal with as we move away from the equator, and that seems to be somewhat parallel to the similarity and differences. But the main point is this: if you're doing a chart of somebody near the equator, do not use the vertex. The vertex is important only for people born at least 30 north or 30 south. The other thing that's important is if someone is born, or there's a horary question or an event pretty far north, even starting around 30 to 40 north actually, you need to start taking into account the vertex. And once you head up into the 50s, the vertex and the opposite point, the anti-vertex, becomes stronger than the ascendant and descendant. I know this is a radical new idea, but we've gone through other radical changes in astrology where people have dropped quadrant house systems and moved over to whole sign. But the thing that's nice about this theory, and we need to test it and see if it really works, because that's all that really matters, but theory can be helpful for discovering something. And what's important about this theory is that we no longer have the problem of why life is normal, and Rovaniemi, when twice a day it should go berserk. And people born in these places should be very strange in some way, and I've consulted a lot of people about years ago when I was doing a lot of consulting from Scandinavian areas up near the Arctic regions, and they're not that different from anybody else. So something's going on, even though they had the ascendant conjunct the midheaven, something is going on, or the ascendant conjunct the fourth house cusp, and I think this is a reasonable solution to the problem. In any case, you've learned some interesting things about the behavior of the house cusps and the vertex, and ways to think about the ascendant, midheaven, and the vertex. So to summarize, the proposed idea introduces a nice three-directional structure in space. It removes the problem of the ascendant disappearing, because when it disappears, the ascendant has lost all power. The sacred geometry is simple and elegant, and if you've watched some of my other videos or videos by some other people, this incredibly beautiful sacred geometry that creates the zodiac, we see that here as well. I've already gone through this. Over 500,000 passengers flying in and out of the airport in 2017. Life seems to just proceed fairly normally there. And the ascendant does not exist. I showed you that, so I'm just reviewing to make sure I didn't forget anything. And I've demonstrated to you that the vertex equals the seventh house cusp system. I believe that's an important house system. That's the one to rely on for people born at extreme latitudes, in other words, very far from the equator. Well, that's it, my friends. This is a long video. I'm at 45 minutes. I hope you found that interesting. It's an attempt to resolve an age-old problem. I feel optimistic about it. I've been playing with this Vertex house system for some time. It's been making sense, and I was a little skeptical of it, and finally all the pieces came together. And I think this is worth giving some attention to. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.